Philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Ontario is reopening, but for those who've been living in the parks of the province's capital city, things are closing. Tonight, we'll examine the situation in Toronto as the city moves to clear encampments from public parks. Then we'll hear from our Ontario hubs about bridging some of the knowledge gaps Ontarians have about Indigenous issues. And from filmmaker Tracey Deer to writer Margaret Atwood, we've got the agendas we can review. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. It's Friday, June 25th, and that's ahead on the agenda. Earlier this week, police and private security surrounded a park in downtown Toronto. After a few tense hours between protesters and city authorities, the encampment where people had been living during the pandemic was cleared. It's been decried by many, but defended by the mayor. Let's find out more. With us now, all in the provincial capital, Michael Thompson, Toronto City Councillor representing Scarborough Centre, Deputy Mayor for the East area of the city, and the Chair of Toronto's Economic and Community Development Committee that oversees shelters. Lorraine Lamb, an outreach worker at Sanctuary Toronto, and Joe Harmer, Professor of Sociology at the University of Toronto Scarborough. Hi, it's nice to see all of you.
Good morning.
Just to get us into our conversation, I wanted to show you some pictures from the situation that transpired in Trinity Bellwoods Park on Tuesday. The first picture, for those who are listening to podcast, there was a large police presence, was brought in to evict roughly a couple dozen people who've been living in the park during the pandemic. And then we have another picture with police and private security forces clash with protesters on site. There you see a fence separating protesters and the police from city workers and those in the encampment, and several arrests were made, including a journalist. I wanted to get a response from all of you of what you think when you see all those pictures and what you made of the whole scene. Lorraine, I'd like to start with you.
I'm really troubled by what happened on Tuesday. It was really violent, and to me, it felt like an overuse of force for about 25 to 30 residents in the park. And I'm really aware that the language has been about protesters versus the city. And I have to name that a lot of the residents actually had asked for people who they have trusted relationships with to show up to support them. So I actually think that a number of us who were there, I personally was there from 5 a.m, and we were there as supporters of people we know and care about. I think too that, you know, the city's messaging is that all of these security and police showed up after they saw the large crowds, but I personally have time-stamped photos and videos showing that at 5 o'clock, these large police forces were already present. I just think that, you know, people are living in encampments because it's their only option. And to see the city come down so hard, you would think that this was some angry biker gang or something about to incite this crazy war or something, but that was not the case. So I'm pretty disappointed by the city's response to Tuesday and some of their messaging afterwards.
And Deputy Mayor, we appreciate you being here because you are here to speak on behalf of the city. Lorraine said that the people who were there to support the people in the encampment. When you look at those pictures as somebody who represents the city on a national stage, what goes through your mind?
Well, you know, this has been a very difficult situation all around. It's been complicated with the complexity of homelessness and the challenges that people are faced. Clearly, the police and our city enforcement officers and others who worked in this encampment to address the issue there prepared a game plan in order to do everything in an orderly, safe way to protect everyone, those who are advocates, those who are people in the encampment area, as well as the staff. And so they determined the type of personnel that were needed. And as I understood it, there were no injuries. There were some arrests. There were some people arrested and were released. And the efforts to address the issue around clearing the encampment was successful. And I think that it's important to understand what we were trying to do as a city, which is to provide shelter and safe space for those individuals. We have removed approximately 1,700 individuals and put them into safe place where they've got shelter, food, clean laundry, dealing with mental health issues as some of the people have. We provided services to them. We've provided additional hotel capacity and so on. So a lot of work is actually being done by the city. And the work that was, that took place with respect to the police and security personnel was necessary to protect everyone involved.
You said that the police was to protect the people there. Lorraine mentioned it was maybe 20 to 25 tents that were there. When you look at those pictures, do you not get a sense of it's disproportionate? You know, what are you keeping? Who are you keeping safe, and who are you keeping safe from?
Sure, as I understand it, and we've seen before, there was an interaction with the police and advocates and others who basically attacked some of our own personnel. We've had some of our city staff been spat on. Things have been thrown at them. They have been threatened. And so obviously the police were there to keep the peace. As I see the photo, I see a photo of a group of police officers and so on. But I also know that it's a big space. So when you show a photograph with respect to a more contained area, I mean, it may show a disproportional sort of, perspective. But at the end of the day, the police were there to ensure that everyone was safe.
Lorraine, I do see your hand. I'm going to come to you, but I really do want to get a reaction from Joe of those pictures. Joe?
Yeah, thank you. And, I'm glad to hear, the councillor talk about this as a complicated issue. I don't think there should have been a game plan at all. I don't think the police should have been there at all. I thought it was an unjustified and bizarre police operation. It wasn't just targeting the 20 to 25 encampment residents who were there. I think it was also meant to intimidate supporters of the encampment residents. And, I really think it's just perverse to talk about this in terms of a compassionate police operation or something to do with human rights. This is just, absolutely the wrong way to deal with these situations in terms of the welfare of the encampment residents, and in many cases pushes people into more dangerous and risky situations. But this should be considered a space in which people need to survive at the end of a global pandemic. It shouldn't be just represented as a type of crime scene that should be destroyed. These are people's homes trying to survive as best they can under extremely difficult circumstances. And they're there because of the inadequacy of the shelter system and the fact that encampment residents tend to be the most vulnerable and often the most victimized in the homeless population.
We're going to talk more about the shelter situation in the city in just a few moments. But Joe, I just wanted to follow up with something that you said. You said this is the wrong way. What would be the right way?
The right way is to continue long-term sustained outreach work that builds relationships with encampment residents, that listens to them, usually with peer workers, people that have shared experience with the encampment residents and sort of speak their language. And that is the only way to do that, to get residents into secure housing if it's available, and so on. Encampment residents and homeless people generally have a great distrust of authority, of the police. Their experience generally is very negative with the police, often for a very good reason. And long-term sustained outreach work carried out by peers is really the only way to go. When you have policing as a default option, like Toronto has, it essentially contaminates and ruins a lot of outreach efforts, because in the end, everyone knows that the stick of the police is there to use. So I think, except under very exceptional circumstances, the police should not be involved.
And Lorraine, I know you wanted to follow up with something that the deputy mayor said.
Yeah, so I totally agree that this is a really complex issue with so many layers and complications. But I think it's interesting. So, Deputy Mayor, you mentioned that the goal of the day was achieved. And so I think if the goal of the day was to clear the encampments from the park, yes, there are currently no more tents left in Bellwoods. However, I know for a fact that all of the people there didn't actually get permanent housing. A bunch of people actually just relocated to different parks. And I think the reality too is Sergeant Bernardo told me at about 6 a.m. that the cops were there to support the security because the security weren't trained. And so I think that's concerning as well. And I also think that Trinity Bellwoods is a really large park. And so this was contained in just the north and south ends, but the rest of the park was very, very peaceful. There were lots of people playing and riding their bikes. And I think when we talk about safety, I can speak very honestly and I can tell you about the women that I was supporting. There were 3 women in particular that I was connecting with throughout the day, and they were so traumatized. And me being there all day, like, the pepper spray did not make me feel safe. The riot-mounted police did not make me feel safe. So I think this language of safety, like, I definitely have questions about it. And I think that, you know, when we talk about getting people inside the shelter system, and I know we're going to talk about this, but I think that, you know, yes, people might have a roof over their head, but there's, you know, laundry is not done on site. It's an outside place that does it. So people have lost laundry. A number of people I know in these spaces have not met a single housing worker because there's not enough workers and there's no housing. And so I think there's this idea of what's inside these shelter spaces, but the reality is that's not actually what's happening because it's just understaffed. And so I don't think we can, you know, talk about this idealistic shelter as if that's actually what's happening, because it's actually not.
And Deputy Mayor, you know, I just wanted to follow up with that, because throughout the pandemic, we've been telling each other that we're in this together. The pandemic has turned a lot of people's lives upside down. You know, and we've talked about public spaces, especially parks, people having access to them. What message do you feel this situation sent in terms of Toronto's parks and who they're for?
So the parks are for everyone. And we've had a lot of complaints from the general public about the encampments. And the question is, what is the city doing about it? And so, as both the guests have indicated, that the shelter system, obviously some people have concern with them. We have concerns with them as well, and we're trying to make them better. To date, we have spent about $663 million trying to address this issue. We have also got additional hotel space to provide, facilities for those in need. And the staff have actually been working for months now with respect to those in encampment to deal with issues, personal and mental issues, trying to also develop a housing accommodation plan for them. So to the point that Joe has made with respect to spend more time with people in the encampment, trying to work with them, we have done so. We feel that as we now are into the summer months, there's a need to deal with the issue that's in front of us, which is to provide space for people, at the same time clearing the encampments in our park so more residents can have access to the parks. The parks are not designed for places for people to live in.
Well, I'm just, when you were talking about the money and you're talking about the camps and about the hotels, my understanding is that, you know, as soon as the pandemic is done, those hotel spaces will not be available. And Lorraine mentioned, you know, with the encampments, there's something called community. We all should have a right to community. So I just wanted to ask you the why. Why do you think that people would rather be in the encampment than go to these shelters that you say you've spent a lot of money putting into?
So we have seen, with respect to the numbers, we've seen that about 40% of the people that are actually in the encampment are actually new to the environment of the shelter services. So we as a city are working diligently. We've got a number of projects on the way right now. One of the things that we have coming on stream, which we have about 82 projects that will provide about 10,676 new housing facilities to address the issue. As you know, it does take some time in order for us to build and to provide these accommodation. In the interim, we're doing the best that we can. I don't believe that the shelter system is the best thing. I think permanent housing is the best solution. In the interim, we're actually working with respect to a variety of different models to accommodate the need. The need continues to grow. We have people from all over the province and elsewhere coming to Toronto because of the fact of our system. We know that the system is not perfect, but we're working really hard in terms of addressing. Again, I reiterated, since April of last year, we have been able to relocate about 1,700 people from the encampments to be able to help them.
Okay, Joe, I wanted to bring you in on it. What are the safety concerns around shelters?
To go to people in encampments and say we have shelter space for you is not a solution, because essentially they've been banned or forced out of shelters, or they've simply find shelters to be intolerable. One of the central problems with shelters is the isolation that people have experienced, which can be devastating for some residents. It can also be, in terms of the context of the overdose crisis, it can be deadly. I mean, isolation can kill in certain circumstances. So, I think in terms of, what the councillor has said, I think what bothers me, and I think it's, we should talk about more, is the fact that he's, says that there's been outreach work and we've done this sort of thing, but all of a sudden we stop because it's summertime, because people want to use the parks. And it does bring up the fundamental question about, who are the parks for? I mean, clearly the city thinks the parks are for people like you and I with comfortable incomes and lives who want to, have a glass of wine and have dinner, or for people in leisure activities and so on. What's very clear from the mayor is that the parks are not for people who need them for survival space. Encampments are the sort of last chance survival space for many unhoused individuals. And it's very clear the city doesn't think that parks, that those people should have any claim to park space at all. I find that, deeply undemocratic. And I really wonder if we can be proud of a city that actually enforces that distinction, enforces that exclusion with the type of raw police power that we saw. And just one other point I want to make is I think one of the real tragedy about Tuesday is that I think that type of police operation, that type of ridiculous overkill, the type of dramatization of sort of paramilitary police power in different types of ways, I think is going to badly or perhaps permanently damage city efforts in the future to carry out further outreach work. I think when the city does try and convince encampment residents, and there will be more encampments, this is not a problem that's going to go away. They're going to have a very difficult time because encampment residents will not trust them, and will not trust them. And I think there's a lot of collateral damage we're going to be seeing in the future. Even if there is secure housing available, it's going to be very hard now to build trusting relationships and get encampment residents into proper secure housing. So I think that's really one of the tragic aspects. And again, I really would hope that the mayor and the council rethinks this sort of crime control approach. It's really going to be counterproductive in the long term.
Lorraine, we saw police, we saw a lot of police, we saw mounted police, we saw private security on Tuesday. How does the cost of this sort of operation compare to the costs needed to provide some long-term housing solutions for those who were living in Trinity Bellwoods?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I wanted to go back to, I think we also saw a huge group of anti-lockdown protesters descend on Bellwoods, and there was just a few bike cops present when those protests were happening. I also wanted to come back to the shelter reality. Last night I was on the phone with a 22-year-old who was placed in the shelter with a stranger, and he was terrified, understandably. I lost my friend Roxy last month in the hotel shelter, and the month before I lost my friend Mel. We're grieving a lot of people who are dying in these hotel shelter spaces because they're not adequately set up. And a number of us have actually spoken to the city to say, if these are going to be set up, we need to have certain things in place. And that was not listened to. And Councillor, I really appreciate that you mentioned that, like, there's so many people that are new to the system right now, because like homelessness is on the rise and this is not the solution. And I also understand that like housing takes time, but you know, it takes time, but then what do we do when there's so many people that are becoming homeless and yet the solutions are so slow moving? And one of the suggestions that was put forward by Councillor Matlow at City Council a couple weeks ago was that we should actually have a lived experience advisory board to consult with how shelters can be made better. And that was voted down again. So I hear what you're saying about, you know, the city's working to try to find ways to make the shelter system better, but yet the motion was voted against. So I'm having a hard time understanding why that was the case. But back to the shelter costs, the cost of one shelter hotel bed right now is $6,000 a month per person. That money, like that can be rent supplements for people for permanent housing if there was access to permanent housing. And then when we were talking about Tuesday, I counted at about 6:30, I counted about 50 police officers in the parking lot of the community center. So all of that salary multiplied by the course of the day, and there was way more than 50 police officers that were there. So, you know, if we do the math there, and then the private security, and then the corporate security, and then the various city staff, and then the park staff, I think there could have been up to about $250,000 spent that day on trying to enforce this clearing of the encampment. That is a lot of money.
I want to give you an opportunity to respond, Deputy Mayor, but before I do that, I just wanted to read some tweets that were sent out by your colleagues. The mayor has said this was a reasonable response, but other Toronto councillors disagreed with the approach taken and the justifications made. We have a tweet here from Josh Matlow in response to Mayor John Tory calling the Trinity Bellwoods Park encampment evictions reasonable, firm, but compassionate. Councillor Josh Matlow tweeted the following: I disagree with Mayor Tory. Encampments cannot remain forever, but the approach the city took yesterday was neither reasonable or compassionate. It was wrong. Root issues including housing, safety in shelters, and for some, access to mental health must be addressed. Another one from Joe Cressy, Councillor Joe Cressy, whose ward includes Trinity Bellwoods, and he wrote, ending chronic homelessness, not simply clearing encampments, that must be our collective task. Encampments are not a solution to chronic homelessness. Neither is simply clearing them. And another one from Councillor Mike Layton, and he shared, I know from speaking with residents that they do not feel safe in the city's current offerings. Council has not done enough to build trust and ensure safety of residents in housing. Deputy Mayor, is there anything your fellow colleagues said there that you disagree with?
The city has been working to ensure that our consideration for the health and welfare and well-being for those who are living outside are being addressed. I think a broader application with respect to how we deal with these issues are actually being worked on by a variety of people, NGOs, and city staff. I know that it's easy to make comments with respect to the situation. However, we have all been working in a way to try to facilitate a response in a holistic, healthy way to help those who are experiencing homelessness in our city, along with addiction, mental health issues, and so on. The city has been working with respect to partners and agencies to trying to find solutions to provide safe housing and accommodation for those who are in need. We've seen an influx with respect to those who are experiencing homelessness and so on as a result of the pandemic. And of course, this started well before it. I don't know if you remember, some 20 years ago or so, we had the big tent city down at Parliament and Lakeshore. We had to address the situation there. We continue to build based on experiences and things that we're learning. And while we may not have it perfect at this point in time, we are working through to address the issue that require us to ensure that people are safe in the accommodations that we provide to them. That's a goal of the City Council. That's a goal of the city staff. And I think that's a goal for most people living in this city, wanting to deal with a very difficult situation. And Toronto has become the Mecca where people come because we have services and we are trying to respond. And we have a number of, as I mentioned earlier on, permanent housing that are coming on stream. We have communities now that are accepting modular homes. And within that, there are issues, but we're working through those because Torontonians are aware that we must do more to help those who are experiencing homelessness. And we have a long way to go, and we have an opportunity to work with all those who have an interest in dealing with this very complicated and complex issue.
Lorraine, I have about a minute left. We've been hearing this is a very complicated situation. We've heard about safety, but I guess that we should remember that this is concerning people's lives who need immediate action. Do you think that there seems to be a division between how the council's approaching it if you live in urban or suburban areas? How do you think that's going to impede progress around this discussion?
Yeah, the current council setup feels to me like there's sort of the councillors who represent the urban, and then there's the suburban. And myself, I grew up in the Don Valley North riding, so I understand that the realities of what the councillors are focusing on there are very different from what the downtown councillors are voting for. And therefore, when city council is pushing forward motions, the votes will play out very differently. So I think that if we don't look out for the most vulnerable communities amongst us, we're not really all in this together. Most of us are a couple paychecks away from being in the encampment, from needing a washroom in the park that was almost voted against. Again, like I think when I observed city council that day, those who voted against, washrooms in the parks were those who were not in the urban core, were those who were sort of more removed from the downtown space. And so these decisions are affecting a lot of really vulnerable people. And so I do think that, urban and not urban council representation is clearly causing a fallout that's affecting some of our really vulnerable people. I think that even if, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but I think even if people did not care about homeless people at all, the financial cost it is to support people who are homeless is one that we all carry. So I think it's really important that we actually consider decisions that will be long-term, that are actually sustainable, because the actions from Tuesday merely displaced people from one park to another park, and I know that for sure.
We've run out of time. Thank you so much for your time, Lorraine, and Deputy Mayor. Thank you for being here on behalf of the city. And Joe, I wish we were able to talk about the COVID-19 policing on homeless initiative that you're working on. I encourage people to look it up. Thank you all so much for your time. We really do appreciate your insights.
It's never been more obvious that real gaps exist in what Ontarians know about Indigenous issues and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Trying to bridge some of that is part of what TVO's Indigenous Affairs video journalist Chris Beaver works on, and he joins us now from Toronto to tell us more. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jan. Thanks a lot.
Now, I've had the pleasure of working with you for a couple of years now, but this is the first time you're joining us on the program. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you do here at TVO?
Yeah, but before I do that, I just want to take a quick moment in light of yesterday's news to just acknowledge all the children that never made it home from residential school. And, my heart goes out to the survivors and all those people that are grieving right now. And I just want to note that there's a 24/7 residential school crisis line. That's 1-866-925-4419.
Thank you for that. Really
so,
appreciate it.
Yeah. So my role at TVO is to produce Indigenous content from an Indigenous perspective. And my primary focus in that respect is to share positive stories and promote Indigenous excellence. But that said, I also wouldn't shy away from stories about the historical and ongoing abuse of Indigenous peoples in Canada, or, the genocide that is taking place here. In the olden days, I used to make videos out in the real world with people in person. But as of late, we've had to kind of pivot towards making content that we can make remotely. And while in-depth, nuanced Indigenous storytelling is our primary concern and focus, there's also a real need in Canada for some Indigenous 101. And this is because Canada's failed historically to adequately educate Canadians about the true history of our nation. And really this is was in the service of nation building efforts. And consequently, Canadians have been deprived of accurate understanding of Indigenous life. And in my view, this has led to sort of a violent indifference towards Indigenous life.
I want to actually pick up on that because you were talking about, being able to, pivot, work offline. You've actually been part of a team that more recently developed a video explainer series. What do we need to know about that series?
Right. Well, I was just going to say, most people I meet, they want to understand and know more, and they seek social justice. So we just wanted to create resources to help. And so one of the things we're doing is a series of explainer videos that are ultimately kind of in service to our more in-depth Indigenous coverage to answer kind of simple questions like, what is a status card? What is Turtle Island? What's a residential school? We started making this series before the news broke about the Kamloops and the 215 children. And so, we were able to pivot quickly and make a video to address that. And, more recently, a video about what does TwoSpirit mean?
Now, you touched on a little bit. I am curious, why is it important that we share these bite-sized videos in terms of sort of spreading that knowledge about Indigenous perspective as well as the history?
Well, our governments have failed to address the TRC, and colonialism is ongoing. But right now, the truth is spilling out, and we all know that Canada isn't a peaceful nation of benevolent settlers living in unity and diversity. It's a nation who tried to exterminate its Indigenous peoples, and we knew this already, but we have proof now. And I think Canadians and the people of Ontario are ready to embrace truth. And I think every little step we take towards informing people is a step towards greater understanding and the chance of a better future. So this series of videos is just one little thing we can do to put that knowledge in front of people.
Chris, I really appreciate you coming on to share that knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jan.
And now let's actually take a look at one of those videos. This video explains the cultural significance of TwoSpirit identity.
What is TwoSpirit identity? While TwoSpirit can mean different things to different people, it often refers to the gender and sexual diversity of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. Specifically, someone who identifies as having masculine and feminine spirit. Or it might describe a person's sexual, gender, and spiritual identity. TwoSpirit is sacred and exclusively Indigenous. The term TwoSpirit was coined by Elder Myra Laramie, seen here in the middle of this photograph, at the 1990 Indigenous Lesbian and Gay Gathering in Manitoba. Today, it's a mainstream term. And you might recognize it as the 2S in LGBTQ2S+. While it's a relatively new term, it's an age-old concept for many Indigenous peoples. TwoSpirit is an English version of the Anishinaabemowin term Nij-Meneduig. Before TwoSpirit, the common term was Birdash, which came from the French term kept boy. Despite common use, Birdash was inaccurate and derogatory. It was first used by European explorers who were offended by TwoSpirit customs. TwoSpirit people weren't just accepted, but revered by their people. They held prominent spiritual and ceremonial roles. Their identity was honored as a spiritual gift. Ironically, Europeans saw this as further proof that Indigenous peoples were dangerously uncivilized. So TwoSpirit people were oppressed and related customs went underground. Today, Canadian society is steeped in colonial notions of sexuality and gender, even in Indigenous communities. The term TwoSpirit was created in response to this. It's an act of decolonization. However, a general term such as TwoSpirit is also problematic because Indigenous cultures across Turtle Island are too diverse to be adequately generalized. While imperfect, TwoSpirit has been useful to facilitate understanding across cultures. Indigenous, sexual, and gender minorities are a high-risk demographic for suicide in Canada. The Indigenous suicide rate alone is reported to be almost double that of other Canadians. Suicide risk factors include violence, oppression, isolation, and rejection. But this risk can be reduced through connection to culture, tradition, and community. The reclamation of TwoSpirit identity fosters this kind of connection. It offers a history through which people can find strength and pride in who they are. People like musician Jeremy Dutcher, who identifies as TwoSpirit, are using the term to forge a path forward.
I do this work to honor those who have gone before. And I lay the footprints for those yet to come. This is all part of a continuum of Indigenous excellence, and you are here to witness it. I welcome you.
The agenda this week considered the state of democracy with Margaret Atwood, spoke to filmmaker Tracey Deer about her new movie, and heard why writer Anand Giridharadas says there are no good billionaires. The agenda this week in review begins talking to Health Minister Christine Elliott about her government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's play a clip now. We did a program not too long ago with some small business people, and we talked to one guy who owns a salon in Thunder Bay. Tony Muya is his name. And, you know, because of the government restrictions, which I take your point, you say have been necessary for the health of the people of the province, but because of them, he's been open 10 days this year for business, 10 days in 2021. And, well, let's hear from him, and then I'll come out of that with a question.
We've been a safe place since day one. We followed the guidelines that our local health unit, in conjunction with the provincial government, put into place. We spent thousands of dollars in plexiglass in between stations, front desk. We spent so much money on PPEs in our salon. What's worse, more than our numbers being down, is what the Ontario government has done to really ruin the importance of being a hairstylist or a spa technician in Thunder Bay. We are only 4 different businesses that are still closed in the gray zone. So many of my friends and I, we walk around and think, you know, we're almost better off dead than we are alive.
And Tony went on to say he's out $500,000 because he's had to been closed so long. He owes the government money. He's in therapy. His region, again, we checked these numbers this morning, his region has 9 COVID-19 cases. So I guess I want to know what your message is to him and his colleagues who have essentially been closed down throughout the pandemic.
Well, first I would have to say that I'm sorry that this has been so difficult for him and for his colleagues, that this isn't something that we wanted to do. We had to do based on the medical evidence, and what we heard from the medical specialists was that in certain businesses, there's much more proximity, closeness of people to each other, and that's what happens in salons and in places that do things like facials, that sort of thing. And that's why we had to take the steps that we did. I know there has been some financial assistance for people in Ontario, but I know for some people it wasn't available, and that they've gone through very difficult times. But we are doing whatever we can to get as many people vaccinated as possible so that we can move into step 2, which is where salons will be allowed to open, and then into step 3, which will affect other businesses as well. So we watch this very carefully every day. We're not prolonging this for any longer than we absolutely have to. And we want people to be able to get back to their businesses, to get back to their jobs, to be able to get back to all of their families as well.
I do take your point on all of that, but Tony's view would be, I think, if I accurately characterize it, you're a progressive conservative government. You're supposed to be looking out for the little guy. He's a small business person in a rather remote part of the province of Ontario. He's the kind of person who he thought you guys should be looking out for, and he spent the money, he believes, to make his business as safe as possible. And yet he's in deep trouble right now. Do you think you could have done this issue differently and given folks like Tony a better opportunity to succeed, pandemic notwithstanding?
I think that it's something that we have, we've been relying on the medical experts to give us their recommendations about what's safe and what's not safe. And, you know, at the beginning, we didn't have a vaccine. And so we had to take this very, very carefully, which we did. And I know that many people have suffered economically, which we've tried to deal with in terms of providing some economic relief, both in terms of some grants that are available, but also in reducing hydro payments and so on. But I know that people have reached the end of this. I know that people are very anxious to move forward. We do have, our Minister of Small Business has been looking at these issues since day one, have been asking many questions. It's not as if we say that nothing can be open and that's the end of it. We have very vigorous internal discussions about what can and what cannot be open based on the medical evidence, but also based on the precautions that people are taking in their businesses.
I think it was in the middle 1980s when you started to think about or started to write Handmaid's Tale. And you know, this was at a time where the world, actually as the 80s progressed, where the Berlin Wall eventually came down and the Soviet Union disappeared, and it looked like democracy was doing rather well. And yet you're thinking about a time you're thinking about a dystopian time.
It's true. At
that time. Did you have a notion that democracy was going to be fragile nearly 4 decades down the road?
It's always fragile. It's a very fragile governing form. So each governing form has its own fragilities. Monarchies that depend on an heir, you know, somebody who's going to be the next king, they're very fragile. They're vulnerable to not having a successor. Then you got civil wars. So yeah, democracies are always going to be somewhat fragile depending on the rules and depending on whether you allow super PACs and whether you, I think the first big decision was in the 19th century in which corporations were deemed to have the same rights as people. Not only a bad decision, but an unreal decision because corporations are not people. So how much is a democracy subject to the pressure of lots and lots and lots and lots of money? And we have tried to take steps in Canada to limit that. And you can look south of the border and see what happens when you don't limit that.
Mm-hmm. I would like to follow up and ask you a bit of a chippy question related to the North American electorate. And that is, you know, pollsters tell us that anywhere from 20 to 40% of the electorate, maybe a little more some days, well, frankly, don't think a lot about multiculturalism, don't think that gender fluidity is a real thing, are not fans of increased immigration. And I guess I want to ask you, what kind of voice do you think people who believe that are entitled to have in this democracy?
Same voice as anybody else. They get a vote. So, you know, that's how democracies are supposed to work. So if 80% thought that and elected the government, then that would be the government they had elected. And you and I might not like that, but it would be a result of the democratic process. So as I've said, every governing form has got its fragilities, and that's one of them. They don't always produce something that you or I might approve of.
Do you think progressive people...
But they have produced it, yeah.
Right. Do you think progressive people need to take any responsibility for, and this does happen in some cases, I'm not alleging it in this case, but for, you know, kind of shoving people who believe that, shoving their noses in issues which encourage them to explode back?
Well, first of all, I don't like the word progressive.
Okay, what should we say?
Why is that? Because it is based on a belief that progress is inevitable, that there's such a thing as the right side of history and that you have to be on it. And neither of those things are true. So history doesn't have sides. And all you have to do is go back and look at it, and one day you're on, quotes, the right side of history, and the next day you're not. It's more like the revolving wheel of fortune. One day you're up, the next day you're down. Public opinion changes. Things that were approved of 50 years ago are now something nobody would ever do. So it's like that, but progress is not inevitable, and it's very dependent on material conditions. So when there's lots to go around, you're more likely to get tolerant public opinion. When there's less to go around, people get scared.
I gotta tell you, I love this movie, but boy, you do not spare a thing. Let's just show a little clip of this and then we'll come back and chat, okay? Sheldon, if you would, let's go.
My name is Digahandekwa, or you can call me Beans. Everybody does.
This is our road! Our road! If you can't feel pain, no one can hurt you. Ah!
Tracey, there are moments when I'm watching this movie and I'm thinking, did this really happen? I sure hope this did not happen, because this is really too much. So let's start there. How much of this film was autobiographical?
So the emotional through line of the film is very much representative of my coming of age story. In terms of all of the big historical events, the recreations that you see in the film, these are all moments that did happen. I personally wasn't at all of them. I put my character there in order to tell this story, but I was at some of them. And so some of these scenes in the film are ripped directly from my memory, and I endeavored to recreate them exactly as I experienced them. So it's a combination. It's a combination of things I actually experienced myself, historical moments that actually happened, and some moments created to represent the emotional moments that I went through in my coming of age.
Yeah, I get you. I guess you would have been a kid of about 12 years old when the Oka crisis happened. So I'm wondering how influential all of that was in your, I guess, eventual decision down the road to become a filmmaker.
So it was very influential in the filmmaker I have become. I will say that. That summer really shattered my sense of safety, my sense of self-worth, and it led me down a very, very dark path, a very hopeless path for much of my adolescence. And it was the resiliency and the strength of my people that I'm so grateful for, because I was able to climb out of that darkness, and the Oka crisis and what I experienced there is really now my fuel in all the work that I do and in all the bridge building I seek to do with the stories I tell. I never want something like that to happen again, and I never want another Indigenous child to have that kind of coming of age. In terms of it inspiring me to become a filmmaker, I was already on that path. I had started watching movies at home. I was
just enthralled with these different worlds and the safe space to feel my emotions. So I was 12 years old when I was hit by the thunderbolt to become a filmmaker, and I was also 12 years old when I went through this really devastating moment, and it began this journey of figuring out who I am as an Indigenous person and what that means to be an Indigenous person in this country.
This did take place 30 years ago, and I remember it well. This, of course, a dispute over a developer who wanted to build a golf course on what was ancestral burial land for Indigenous communities in Oka, Quebec, and it's 31 years ago. But how much of the feeling of this story do you think is still very present day?
It is entirely current. So the film is a period piece, 31 years ago, as you said, but the themes are all still playing out across this country. The damage that was done to me as a little girl is still being done to our children across the country. So even though it is a period piece, it is still, it's a current story with a very vital message that things do need to change right now, so that this is no longer the coming of age story of our children, because it is devastating and it destroys hope. And it just has to stop. I'm tired of it being an unsafe place for Indigenous people. It just really does have to stop.
I did read your piece in the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times the other day. Fascinating column, and I guess I'm one of those who thought Warren Buffett was one of the good guys, and then I read your column, which says he's not one of the good guys. And I thought he was one of the good guys, and the good guys are the most dangerous guys. Okay, all right. I guess I thought he was one of the good guys because I remember him saying he wants to give away 99.5% of his fortune. And in response to ProPublica's report, he wrote, quote, "I continue to believe that the tax code should be changed substantially and that huge dynastic wealth is not desirable for our society." So he seems to be in the right place. His heart seems to be in the right place. Why is his being one of the good guys making him one of the most dangerous guys as well?
Because the bad guys are quasi-criminals, right? I mean, there are people who commit financial fraud on Wall Street. There are people who run social media platforms in ways that imperil democracy and enable white supremacy. There are people who make billions of dollars selling opioids. That's a certain category of thing. And those stories dominate the news. You've done stories on those things. I've done stories on those things. When people focus on those stories, we're at risk of miseducating them that the problem is the corruption of the system, when in fact the problem is just the system. And part of what is powerful about this story is even when the system is working well, even when you have a well-intentioned person like Warren Buffett, this is barbarism. It is barbarism to have people accumulating $100 billion plus fortunes, while here in New York City, all around me, one of the richest cities in the history of human civilization, there were all these kids this year who couldn't do the remote learning they had to do because they don't have Wi-Fi in New York City in the year 2020 and 2021. These resources are resources that were not paid as wages to folks, were not paid as taxes. And Warren Buffett is playing this interesting double game that we got to be real about. Warren Buffett says, my income taxes should be higher. What this article reveals is that is a trick, because he doesn't have a lot of income. He doesn't report a lot of income. So it's not a surprise now that this story has come out that Warren Buffett is in favor of raising income taxes, because Warren Buffett basically does not have a lot of income. And he presumably constructs his affairs to not have a lot of income, right? And what he does have is appreciating wealth. And I have not heard Warren Buffett advocate for Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax or Bernie Sanders' wealth tax. There have been proposals on the table. Where has he been? Where has he been? If he's truly in favor of ending dynastic wealth and breaking down these fortunes, there have been proposals on the table that you and I have spent time discussing before, and half the country has discussed before here in the United States. Where was he? There was no op-ed then. What he has done is advocate for raising taxes on a kind of money that he doesn't really have, which is income.
Well, let's just remind everybody what Elizabeth Warren had to say, because we're going back a couple of years now when she was running for the Democratic presidential nomination. She proposed a wealth tax on 2% of assets worth more than $50 million and 3% on assets worth more than $1 billion. That was then. Where do you think we should be now on those numbers?
What's interesting is I think that, her plan, and then Bernie Sanders had a plan. These are very, very important conversation starters. They were elevated into the presidential campaign. I think we had a real debate about capitalism and billionaires in this 2020 presidential primary on the Democratic side that we have not had before in America, and that was terrific. But I actually think, in light of what this reporting is showing, even the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders wealth tax plans are good starts, but inadequate to the problem, and grossly inadequate to the problem, possibly inadequate by a factor of 5 or 10.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, June 25th, 2021. Next week marks the end of a most unusual school year. We'll check in on that and what's to come in September on Monday. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and Steve will see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.